The How to Love Living podcast. My name is Jeremy, and this is a weekly podcast just discussing different ways to learn how to love living. And last week we discussed the pandemic, and if you haven't checked out that episode, I would highly recommend it. By the way, hello to you viewers that are listening to the podcast. If you have any feedback or anything, just reach out. You can contact me at contact@howtoloveliving.com or go to howtoloveliving.com, the website, and the contact information is there. So this week's topic is catastrophize. Okay, so pronunciation. When you catastrophize something or just general life stress, catastrophizing is, and I apologize for my pronunciation, it's like aluminium. I can't say the other words. So there's just words I can't say, and that's one of them. In this case, life stress and making things worse than they really are is what I want to talk about. So life stress happens. There are different things that happen in your life that bring stress. This could be something like a piece of bad news that you're getting, or this could be something that, is happening at work or what have you. And really, it is just life stress in general. And one thing I talked about last week about the pandemic was life is still continuing. So the challenges that we have in life are still going to be there regardless of the pandemic. One recommendation I would have is if you are bringing the challenges, so if you're the one that's putting the challenges out there, I would recommend handling each other with kid gloves as much as possible during the pandemic. And the reason I say that is because everyone's stress levels are kind of maxed out, especially as we're heading here now into a rise in the disease rate and hospitalizations and deaths. It's really tough and it's getting harder for everyone. And the hardness isn't just the knowledge of the things happening. It's also that your local shops are going out of business. It's also that everyone you talk to are stressed out as well. And so there's just a group stress going on right now that adding stress to anyone's life is unnecessary at the moment. And I know that, there's times where we have to interact and it's necessary. And my vote is do those things, but handle each other with kid gloves. So approach things in a way that is very empathetic and understanding and forgiving. And I would hope that everyone would do the same to you. So as you're navigating through challenges, there's just a lot of understanding and forgiveness. I think that sometimes righteousness and purity tests make us very obstinate and very opinionated. And the difficulty is we don't know what situations a person's going through. We just can see a specific thing that we can judge, and it's easy that way. One of the best stories, and I think I talked about this earlier in an earlier podcast, but it's one of the stories that really resonate with me in understanding how to approach people and how you'd want to be approached. And this was a story that came from, oh my gosh, I'm looking at my It's funny because I am just kind of talking today and just sharing my experience and stuff, and I'm trying to think of I think it's Dale Carnegie, and it's How to Win Friends and Influence People, and it's a really, really good book. But I think what Dale talks about a lot in that book is, and verify that that's what it is. If not, then I'm going to post this episode and I'll put a correction in the notes, but I'm going to share a link to that book regardless. So, in this book, what it talks about a lot is when you're approaching something or someone, well, you're approaching someone with something, you have to really put yourself in their headspace to get the best response. And you have to really try to understand all the challenges. So, this specific example is the very first of the book when he talks about this. Basically, there's this guy on the train, and Dale's on the train, and the guy is just sitting there. He's reading his paper, and he has like three kids, and the three kids are just running up and down the train. They're screaming, they're fighting, they're, just going crazy. And Dale is getting very irritated. So he is getting really, really upset that this guy doesn't have his children under control, that they're disturbing all the passengers and so on, etc. So Dale goes up to the guy and he confronts him. And he's like, "Can't you get your kids under control?" And the guy looks at him and says, "I am so sorry. The kids just lost their mother this morning and they're not taking it well." And the guy looks so sad. And with that context, Dale completely changed his opinion. And that sometimes is the context we need to approach when we're working with other people. Not that a parent or relative or someone died, but that we don't understand specific circumstances and situations. And it's very easy for us to come in with an attitude towards them and not understand all the complexities of their world. And I think as a good human being, as a good person in this world, we'd want to do that. We'd want to do that just because we really need to we need to treat people how we would want to be treated. And we would want people to understand if they're putting pressure on us or if they're yelling at us or if they're doing something. If we're going through something, we would want them to understand that and maybe come in a little not as harsh. And sometimes people are having bad days. Sometimes there's a lot of different things that drive behavior. And I do feel like as a good community member, it is our responsibility to be cognizant of that and to try to approach things in a measured perspective. And of course, what are you trying to accomplish? So then you're thinking about, okay, what am I trying to accomplish? So on that portion, that's what we want to do is we want to go through and approach people in a very loving and very try to be understanding perspective. And I know it feels good to get vindication. It feels good to say what you need to say and that sort of stuff. And what I'll argue is, then it's to what ends and circumstances and a lot of different things. So I would just ask that everyone be kind and be measured and loving when you're approaching people. And I feel like if you put that energy out in the world, that will be returned to you. So I feel like if you are kind and measured towards your approach with others, then that will come back to you. And so, especially during the pandemic, this is the best time for us to be our best selves. And I think it's also the time where if we are struggling, which we all are in our own ways, we'd want people to approach us in a caring, loving, understanding perspective. Even though they may not understand the specifics of our situation, we would want that. But life stress still is happening during this pandemic. And we do have to delineate. So you as an individual, you're sitting down and you're taking in life, and different challenges come in from life, as I mentioned earlier. So this could be work stress, this could be spousal stress, this could be stress from any number of challenges that we as human beings face in this society. But there's also things that we catastrophize. And oh, I finally got that word. Woo! It's there's things that we just make worse than they really are. And I want to talk a bit about that. I want to talk about catastrophizing and just making things worse than they really are. And really, how do you measure if you're making things worse than it really is? And how do you approach something that is extremely stressful for you, but it's not something that is it's not a danger that's coming immediately. So let's talk about that a little bit. And I think the first challenge when we're having stress and challenges is just understanding which ones are imminent stresses and challenges that are going to be immediate and we need to address them and the stress is valid, and which things are things that we should be concerned about and thinking about, but we shouldn't lie awake at night in a cold sweat worrying about. And how do we delineate them, and how do we approach them? How do we approach them in different ways? So, of course, the immediate stress, my vote is this, and this is just how I see it, and I think this is the best way to do it. You have to walk into the fire. So if you have immediate stress, meaning that there's a challenge or something like that, approach the stress, the point of stress, in a measured, calm perspective. Don't flinch away from it, but come in very forgiving. Sometimes I think that when we're under a good deal of stress, we put a lot of blame on ourselves for that stress. And, sometimes we are the blame for that stress. Sometimes we didn't do something, or we did do something, we brought that stress upon ourselves. And so some of the stress is us beating ourselves up, as well as just the stress of dealing with the problem. Don't beat yourself up about whatever stress you're going through. And here's the justification I have for not beating yourself up. We're all human. We all make mistakes. And in the end, it's going to last for a little bit and it'll be over with. The biggest thing you can do if you made a mistake or if you did something wrong, the best thing you could do is fix it. So work diligently, step into the fire and fix it. Don't beat yourself up. Learn from it and move on. So in fixing it, you have to address it if it's imminent. And you are going to have to just sit in front of the fire and work through it. Part of the torture that I went through when I was younger in that was the stress of, and I still go through, so I'm not being honest. I still go through this. So it's something I've gotten better at, but it's something I'm still, life is it's just a lifelong process of learning and growing. And some people learn and grow better in some directions. Some people learn and grow better in other directions. If you're beating yourself up, and it's unnecessary beating yourself up, and an example could be, I didn't pay that bill and now the bill collector is calling. There may have been different circumstances where you couldn't get that bill paid. Do your due diligence, talk to the person that's calling, work out a deal, be calm, and don't beat yourself up. If you made a mistake on your budgeting, or if you went and spent the money on something else, learn from that experience and move on. That's it. That's how you approach imminent stress, is you deal with it. Don't beat yourself up. Learn and move on. And the reason you don't want to beat yourself up, and the reason you don't want to kind of go down that rabbit hole is I think those of us with backgrounds where we had abusive parents, or we've had circumstances that were trying or challenging, and this could be I mean, the spectrum of abuse could be from anything, anyone, and it's very specific to you and it's very specific to your experience. With that background, though, especially if you were the one at fault, and especially if you were told you were the one at fault, you have a tendency to want to relive that experience. And you'll relive that through a variety of ways. But one of the ways you do that is through, if you did something wrong, then you just beat yourself up. If and that's all from your historical stuff. But what I'll argue is, as long as you can pinpoint and self-reflect on, this thing happened to me and I'm not going to perpetuate that into the future, I think that's good. The world is generally a safe place. Of course, terrible things happen in this world, perpetuated by humans, perpetuated by nature, any variety of things. But generally, the world is a safe place. We can't take one-off circumstances and say the world is very dangerous. It isn't. But what I'll say is it's taking that measured perspective and going in and working to fix diligently the thing that is wrong. Don't beat yourself up. Move on. One thing I believe, and this may be controversial, I don't care. Don't talk about it. And the reason I say don't talk about it, one, especially if you had done a wrong against someone, stop reminding them of it. It may make you feel better to bring it up and apologize again. It's pointless. It just reminds them of your bad behavior. And really, you haven't moved on. You got to move on. You just got to learn and let go. So don't bring up your bad behavior. That actually is something that I fixed pretty quickly, just because I realized that is doing more damage by bringing up my bad behavior than it was to just fix it, learn, and move on. And that's what I would argue. So when you do something bad, apologize, or something, and it could be anything, but apologize, rectify it, and move on and learn from it. Those are the 4 steps. And it's that simple. Now, let's say that you're actually catastrophizing or worried about something oblivious in the future. I'm not making up words. Like something amorphous in the future that could be bad, it could be fine, so on, etc. But there's no imminent threat. We have these things, and this could be anything from waiting to hear back on a debt, or waiting to hear back on some good or bad news, or, like, let's say that we're waiting for test results, or if we're waiting for information that will decide our future, or if we're waiting to figure out if our neighborhood's the next to be bombed. And, all those things are potential bad things that could happen that we don't know if it is or isn't going to happen. And what they have found, so I'll give you an example I think is pretty apt. And I brought up the bombing specifically because this example includes the bombings. Basically, back in World War II, this is with the Germans, England was getting bombed. London specifically was getting bombed routinely. No neighborhood really knew who was going to get bombed. So you lived in a situation where you're under constant threat all the time. That is very distressful. You don't know if it's immediate, because it could be another neighborhood, it could be yours, but you knew that it was a threat. That is a threat that could or could not happen in the future. So the London government sent out psychologists to just interview people in the different neighborhoods and kind of find out, what their mindset was. And the whole of London was depressed because all the people every day were worried, am I the next neighborhood? Am I the next neighborhood? Are we going to get bombed? And then they went and interviewed areas that had been bombed and interviewed the people. And the people in the areas that had been bombed were, stressed, but their stress level was much lower. And what they found is that the potential to get bombed was more stressful and long-term stress than once you'd gone through it. That once you'd gone through it, your stress was a lot less. And that is one of the most phenomenal things to understand, is understanding that some of this amorphous threat that stresses us out causes more stress than the actual event itself. So London, trying to figure out, and the Queen and all the government trying to figure out how to help the people, created the tagline, keep calm and carry on. And that's where that came from, was them trying to help their citizens be calm as any neighborhood could get bombed. I think that's a good tagline, keep calm and carry on. And so when you're going through a potential threat, or you're stressed out about something that could or could not happen, keep calm and carry on. You don't know if it will happen. The other thing I'll argue is, as a capable human being, as we all are, we have faced challenges in the past, and we can face and meet challenges in the future. So keep calm and carry on. So when you feel like you're catastrophizing something or making something worse than it really is because you don't know what it is, don't let your head take complete control. Don't lose sleep. Don't live in constant fear. What I would argue too is, when you're going through it, just walk through in your head what is the worst that could happen, and walk through all the steps. So if, let's say that, you got some bad news from work, what is the worst that can happen? So then, well, that means that I'm going to have, let's say that you are taking on more responsibilities. Well, let's say that then, well, now I got more responsibilities to take care of. What's the worst that can happen from that? Well, I'm not going to be able to complete all my work the way I need to complete it. Well, what's the worst that can happen from that? Well, my manager could give me a bad review. Well, what's the worst that could happen? Well, if I got a bad review, that could eventually lead to me being fired. So then, as a capable human being, you know that there's several steps to get to the worst that could happen, which is you take on this responsibility and you get fired. And there's several opportunities to go through and communicate out if the work is too stressful to your manager and partner with them to figure out, okay, what can I do to mitigate this? That's just one example, but that kind of figuring out what's the worst that could happen, then walking through the steps gives you peace because at least you know you can tackle each individual step. It isn't like you're going to get this additional work and immediately be fired, you know? So you have several steps between the additional work and then getting fired that you can come in and do your due diligence and get it taken care of. So what I'll argue then is you'll put yourself in a worse space if you're just completely stressed out about the additional work that you're getting. And then that happens, you're going to be in a less able spot to really confront it. So what I'll argue is decreasing and managing this pre-stress is really important because that will put you in a space where when the actual stress happens, you can take care of it. So we talked a bit about imminent threats and potential threats and how to manage that. But now I want to switch gears a little bit and just talk about overall stress and managing overall stress in our lives. You know, there is a saying that there's only so much shit you can give in life for things. And it's a very apt statement. And the way I'll say that is there's a lot of challenges being a human being and living in society. There's a lot of challenges, and there's only so much of our wherewithal that we have to, i.e., shoulds, that we have to give in, the things that we're challenged with. And what I'll say is this, is if we completely care about every single thing that we're interfaced with that's concerning for us, we're going to be stretched to the max. So then what it is it's being judicious about the challenges that we're going to take on, the shits that you give. And the reason we want to be judicious is because if we take everything on, we give in every last ounce of ourselves and we're nothing but a hollow shell. And we can't do that. So what we have to do is be judicious about the things that we're going to confront, the things that we're going to deal with, and you have to let the rest go. And it's a spectrum. So each person has the capability of handling so much, and some people can handle more and some people can handle less. It's all okay. So be judicious about what you're confronting. Do a lot of self-care. So one way you can replenish your battery when you're under a lot of stress, especially with the pandemic, and that's why last week I talked a lot about self-care, is because our batteries are constantly being drained. And so a lot of self-care is really important right now because there's only so much that we can tackle. And so the self-care helps us in tackling just a little bit more or managing the things we have to tackle. So self-care can look like a lot of different things for a lot of different people. For me, it's taking baths, it's reading, it's working on my hobbies that I have no responsibility towards, but I want to do. So like my photography or my podcasting in this case, or my Lego or my gaming, what have you, my music. So do the things that refresh your battery. And basically the way you know that is things you like to do. What do you like to do? It's all different for everyone. And so you have to find what refreshes your specific batteries and do that. If it's petting an animal, or if it's reading long novels, or if it is out, socializing, call your friends. Don't go physically visit them, but call them and say hi. So that's what you can do to kind of refresh your battery. But even when you do a lot of self maintenance, between the challenges that are imminent and between the just general stress in life, your batteries in this particular time isn't going to be as high. Your wherewithal to care is going to be lower. And so be okay with that. Be at peace with where you're at, and be happy that you and your loved ones are alive and doing generally well, and know that we're going to get on the other side of this. And that's one thing I'll say is any stress that we have, think back on any stress you've had in the past, any stress, just think back on it. Take a look at a specific one. Is it happening now? Probably not. So what I'll say is that sometimes our stress is very real and very imminent and very catastrophic and all those things at the time it's happening. But a week, 2 weeks later, you forget about it. Like you don't even think about it once it's over. And so be cognizant of that when you're going through stress, that, hey, once this is over, it's done with. So don't get too caught up in it, and give yourself some space to realize, I know, like, I kind of wish that things were just mechanical, to be honest with you. Like, it'd be nice if a stress or challenge would come up and I would mechanically respond, here you go, here you go. But I'm not capable of that. Maybe some people are, and I know that some people are, and I'm really jealous of that. But for me, I'm not like that. And I'm in acceptance of it. I understand that when something stressful happens, I'm going to have a higher reaction. Some people would argue that I'm a little bit high strung, and that's okay. And that's why I speak to this stuff a bit, is because I experience it. And that's what I'm trying to do with the podcast, is just speak to the things I'm experiencing and talk a bit about how I'm dealing with them, so I can share, my experience and what I read and all that stuff with you. And even if I make one person's life easier, my job is done. In the end, this is my last piece of advice, is when you're walking through fire, when you're catastrophizing, or if you're in imminent danger, or if the stress level just seems overwhelming, do your self-care, do all the steps we talked about in this episode. But in the end, it gets down to this. And this is, I believe this is one of the stronger traits, if you can develop it, if you don't already have it, that it's strong. It's a very strong trait. And it's so obvious and it's so simple. One foot in front of the other. Get up every day and deal with just the stress and challenges that you have. One foot in front of the other. Work to make things better. Work to do good work and be a good person, but it's just one foot in front of the other every single day. It's getting up out of bed. It's being present and engaging and overcoming yourself. It's overcoming your mind. Another book I'll recommend that kind of talks about this is A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. It's actually one of the books that got me into this mindset and thinking and way of thinking. He did a series with Oprah. So Oprah and Eckhart did a series on A New Earth. It's a book club series. It is phenomenal. It's a lot of work to make it through the series, and sometimes you have to listen to episodes several times through, or at least I did, to get the full value, just because in that hour-long episode they cover a lot. And then reading the book reinforces what they talk about. But I definitely recommend the podcast. I think it's out on podcast now. I'll find it and I'll put a link in the show notes. So it's Eckhart and Oprah, and it is phenomenal, and it just talks a lot about what we're talking about now, about managing your mind, managing your stress, managing all the different components. So, it's going to be funny because as we move forward on this journey, there are going to be times when I repeat things. And the repeating isn't to repeat because I don't have content, or it is because there's so much to cover that my biggest fear is this. And sometimes the same concepts get applied anyway, but my biggest fear is if we didn't repeat some of the ideas, they'll be forgotten, because some of these basic skill sets, basic ways of managing your mind, are just something that you can't learn immediately, that it does bear repeating, and it applies across multiple different things. So you will hear me repeating different things. This is to remind myself, to remind you, and just to share my experiences. So thank you for listening. Check out the content that I am sharing in the show notes with the podcast episode, or you can go on howtoloveliving.com and check it out there. If you have any feedback or questions, definitely message me through contact@howtoloveliving.com, or you can go to my website, howtoloveliving.com, and go to the contact us page. Otherwise, I hope you have an awesome week. It's Sunday today. I'm recording. I actually modified my schedule. So Saturday I was recording, but now I'm doing it on Sunday. And then I am going through and posting on Sunday. So I've gotten all the pieces together to do that, to get this automated so I can focus on the content and less on the production. And that makes me very happy, because then I can really put the effort into what I'm saying over what I have to do to get what I'm saying to you. Anyway, definitely reach out. I hope you have an amazing week, and I will see you in a week. Thank you.